Ever feel like Washington, D.C. is playing a high stakes game of chicken with your wallet? Today, I am pulling back the curtain on the U.S. government shutdown, not just the headlines, but what it actually means for your job, your investments, and your peace of mind. Let's make sense of the chaos and get tactical. What's happening, my beautiful financiers? Welcome back to another episode of the Do.Different.Better show, where we turn wealth wisdom into money moves. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, founder and CEO of Social Impact Now and Connective Institute, and your guide to today's urgent topic, the U.S. government shutdown. By the end, you'll understand what the shutdown is, why shutdowns even happen, the events leading up to the current lapse, who's impacted and how, and I'm going to get you the concrete steps to help you personally, but also civically. And I just want to let you know, I've also got a one-pager that kind of breaks everything down as well. So you'll definitely want to hit me up on my YouTube channel at Do Different Better. Tap the subscribe button and I'll make sure that you get all the updates and access to the one-pager breaking all of this down. But let's take a step back and let's talk about this from the beginning. Whether you're joining us on your commute or tackling your own to-do list or just grabbing a moment to invest in your financial knowledge, I am so glad that you are here. Like I said, today we're diving into a topic that's probably lurking in your news feeds, even maybe sparking a little or maybe a lot of anxiety, and that's the U.S. government shutdown. Now, government shutdown sounds really, really heavy, like something out of a political thriller, an Alex Cross novel. But beyond the headlines and the political drama, this is a real world event with genuine impact on your job, your investments, and potentially your peace of mind. It's probably already impacting you. And for the nearly accredited or wealth adjacent investors and professionals and finance adjacent roles, understanding this isn't just about current events. It's about being strategically informed. Think of it as decoding another layer of the complexity of the financial world and turning confusion into clarity. And that, my friends, is what we do best here at the Do It Different Better show. So roughly for the next 45 minutes, I'm going to be pulling back the curtain about this whole shutdown saga. I'm going to break down exactly what a government shutdown is, and not just the jargon, but actually the practical mechanics of it, and give you a little bit of context, because believe it or not, this isn't our first rodeo. This has happened before. You may be too young or maybe too old to remember that we've gone through these before. This isn't the first time around. But I'm going to talk about why maybe there are some good things to this, but also what the bad things are and how they actually impact your wallet at the grocery store, but also thinking about the growth of your personal company, as well as maybe your employer, and understanding how all of that works. But it won't be all doom and gloom, I promise. So just stick with me all the way till the end, okay? But the most important thing is that I'm going to talk about the real actual impacts on individuals like you and me, as well as some of the different industries and the broader U.S. economy and how it maybe impacts us internationally. So with all of that, I know it's a lot, but hang on tight. I'm going to take you through this ride. It's going to be a little bit bumpy, but I promise you, it's really going to give you an opportunity to understand how this might impact you directly on the ground and how you might want to think about leveraging this information to plan not only around this shutdown, but also being prepared for the next time it happens, or putting things in place to prevent it impacting you in the future. So first, what is a government shutdown? I'm always going to give you the nitty and the gritty. So you've heard the phrase government shutdown. It's been bandied around. You probably have heard it on the news, your favorite late night shows, but let's be honest. For many of us, it sounds like a very precise policy decision and more like our internet going out right before a big meeting. It's frustrating, it's inconvenient, and just leaves you wondering with more questions and like, why me? Why now? So what actually happens when Uncle Sam decides to hit the snooze button on everything? Simply put, a government shutdown occurs when Congress fails to do its primary job, budgeting. Yes, even the feds need to do a budget, and I think they dislike doing a budget probably as much as you do. More specifically, they don't pass the necessary funding legislation called appropriations. And this is the money that is designated for certain expenses and contracts. And all of this is in with mind of the upcoming fiscal year. The government's fiscal year starts on October 1st. And they usually, what happens is they can't agree on the spending by a deadline, and they can't even agree on a temporary patch up job, which is what's known as a continuing resolution, which just keeps funding things at an existing level for a short period of time. Then poof, many parts of the government essentially run out of money. Think of it as like when you have $10 in the bank account, but you've got 3 more days until payday. No budget, no money, no operations, except, of course, the business in question is the entire US government, with tentacles reaching nearly every aspect of our lives. When this happens, which is what they call non-essential government operations, screech to a halt. And yes, you hear that phrase, non-essential, and you might think, but everything is essential. The government pretty much touches everything in everyone's life. And you're not wrong. While truly life and death services like national security, law enforcement, and emergency medical aid usually continue, many federal employees, our neighbors, our friends, our family, are furloughed, meaning they are sent home without pay. Imagine that, showing up to work, keeping things running, and crossing your fingers for retroactive pay. It's certainly a unique way to manage a workforce, wouldn't you say? Essential workers report to duty, often without clarity on when their next paycheck will arrive. Meanwhile, things like processing passports, issuing business permits, and scientific research, and even keeping national parks open get put on hold. It's not a full stop, but it's a significant slowdown that creates a cascade of uncertainty. And it's important to remember the government is the single largest employer in the United States. So if you think about that, it's bigger than Apple, it's bigger than Amazon. It is the single largest employer in the United States. So you can understand that those tentacles of impact, that wave goes all the way down to actually your neighborhood, maybe even some of your neighbors or your kids who might be working in government jobs or government adjacent work. So why does the political game of musical chairs happen in the first place? Well, at its core, it's about the power of the purse. You may have heard that term. Our Constitution explicitly gives Congress the responsibility to decide how federal money is spent. And sometimes, usually when politicians have feelings about certain spending levels or specific policy demands or just broader ideological battles, which I feel like that's really what's going on this time, they simply can't agree. The budget then becomes a battlefield. It's often used as leverage. Think of maybe if you're a kid of divorced parents and they're always bickering and fighting and you're just like, yeah, but what's really the goal? What do we need to get done here? If you don't get, you'll hear someone say, if you don't give me what I want, I won't vote on your funding bill. And then cue the dramatic music. We are in a shutdown. It's a high stakes negotiation tactic. And unfortunately, it often feels like we, the everyday citizens, end up being the bargaining chips. And if you ask me, that's not exactly doing different better policymaking for a stable economy. So as you can see, now that we know the what and we know the why of a government shutdown, you might be thinking, is this a new thing, or does Washington just like to keep us on our toes, biting our fingernails? Well, just say that it isn't exactly groundbreaking news in the annals of political strategy. In fact, Uncle Sam has done this dance quite a few times before. So let's take a quick sassy trip down memory lane to unpack some historical context based on understanding the past, which can help us navigate the present. So I really want you to understand that both political sides, no matter what your political leaning is, have an influence on the government shutdown, not only leading up to the shutdown, but also how long the shutdown takes. I think we're now sitting in like 3 weeks of the government shutdown. No matter what your ideological leaning, this really requires a team effort. Think of it as you may not like a player on your team if you've ever played sports before, but you do want to win the game. You've got to figure out a way of how you're going to pull it together as a team to get to the finish line to win the championship or win the game. This is what we need our political leaders to do in this moment, is figure out a way to get to the finish line, right? Because at the end of the day, I know that I have several friends who have children who are working in government jobs, and the fact that they are economically unstable, they don't know if they're going to be able to pay their mortgage. They don't know if they're going to be able to buy groceries. They don't know, they have no idea when their next paycheck is. And if they're already living paycheck to paycheck, which I know isn't you because you're listening to the Do.Different.Better show. But for those who aren't maybe listening to the show and getting all these valuable tips and tricks, they're living paycheck to paycheck. And so going 3 weeks without a paycheck is devastating. It's financially devastating. They have tenants. Maybe you're actually own a building. How many people that are living in your building might be impacted by the government shutdown and can't pay their rent? So as you can see, this now has this has a trickle effect into our economy. You might have maybe a 10 unit building. Maybe 3 of your folks are working in some kind of quasi or directly in a government job. They are going 3 or 4 weeks without a paycheck. You can't pay your mortgage. What happens to your mortgage because you are not able to pay fully your mortgage, and then the stream of things, that the implications just continues to snowball, right? So as you can understand, we've really got to think about how can we, as not only a nation, but also as our political leaders, need to really come together to actually move this thing forward. We've got to get out of this shutdown. So now that we've kind of covered the who and the what, you've got a little bit of context. I don't want you to go anywhere because I'm going to continue to talk about how this story has actually come up in our past. It's really, really nothing new. So you want to stay up to date on what is happening, right? I'm going to give you a little bit of a teaser, but like I mentioned before, we've been here before, but how many times has the government actually shut down? Well, that really depends on how you want to count them. Whether it's a full shutdown or partial shutdown, the number can vary from, say, like it's more than a handful. Since 1976, we've actually seen more than 20 instances of where funding has actually lapsed. I know I can remember in my particular lifetime, I know that I have cognizantly been aware of at least 5, and that's probably just even in the last 20 years, there's been at least 5 shutdowns. So, this is actually something we have experience with. And ironically, I feel like we never learn the lessons. We keep finding ourselves in these situations, nor are we putting the things in place to prevent them from happening in the future. So that can be really, really frustrating. But I'm going to get into all of this in the next segment of the show. So keep listening, come back and hit us up. I want to give a shout out to my radio partner, AM 950, but I want you to come and see me after the break, where we're going to start to really get into more of the historical context, but also what are some of the impacts that are happening in the current government shutdown. So I will see you after the break. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, and you are listening to the Do.Different.Better show. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. I'm here today talking about the government shutdown, helping you understand what exactly is a government shutdown, how it happens, who it involves, and some practical and tactical information on how you can better position yourself, not only in the current government shutdown, but hopefully lay the groundwork and the foundation to deal with any future government shutdowns. So right before the break, I talked to you about when was the last time we've had these government shutdowns, or that the fact that we've had them before. And going back to 1976, we've had over 20 full or partial government shutdowns. I've actually, from just my own memory, in the last 20 years, can name off 5 that I know that we've been a part of. And I think the last one was actually in the last 5 to 10 years. So it's nothing new, unfortunately. You would think we've learned our lesson, and it seems like we haven't. However, the modern era is of the significant and impact shutdowns really kicked off after 1980, when a legal interpretation completely changed, preventing agencies from spending any money without specific appropriations. And so just to remind you what an appropriation is, it's basically a line item in the larger budget, right? It outlines specifically whether it is a contract that is going to go to a particular entity or agency, and or the overall spending for a particular agency, and their spending for all the things that they need to do. Those are called appropriations. But so anytime that the government has not been able to agree on these appropriations, that's when things start to go awry. But before that, things often just chugged along. Even though the appropriations may not have been 100% agreed upon, the government kept working with the intention that they would figure it out. Like they would get to some place where they would agree. But those were the good old days, right? That have long since gone by. But let's highlight a few of some of the memorable ones because they often set a precedent or have significant impacts. We had the 1995-96 shutdown under President Bill Clinton, a couple of them actually totaling 27 days. So that's almost a month. These were largely over Medicare, education, and environmental spending. The result? Public backlash against congressional Republicans, and surprisingly, Clinton's approval ratings went up. Then we fast forward to 2013 under President Barack Obama, which was a 16-day shutdown, primarily over defunding the Affordable Care Act. So the Affordable Care Act, or sometimes it's called Obamacare, but the Affordable Care Act makes it largely accessible for particularly young people under the age of 26, over the age of 26 who have fallen off of their parents' insurance, but also people who may be in low wage jobs to be able to get healthcare coverage at a reasonable cost that is supported by either a state policy or a national policy. Again, there was significant public frustration, and it highlighted how critical government services really are. And more recently, the 2018-2019 shutdown under President Donald Trump, which lasted a whopping 35 days, making it the longest in U.S. history. That one was over border wall funding. Every time different issues, same high-stakes political poker, the duration and the specific points of the contention might change, but the core mechanism remains the same: a failure to agree on how to fund the government. So, given this recurring soap opera drama, we have to ask, what's the supposed good here, and what's the undeniable bad? Now, when I say good, I'm talking purely from a political strategy perspective, not from the perspective of an everyday citizen like you and me trying to make ends meet, mind you. From a political angle, some might argue that shutdowns force difficult conversation and compromise. If you believe government spending is out of control or that a specific policy is detrimental, a shutdown can be seen as a way to take a firm stance and hold Congress accountable to its funding responsibilities. It's a tool of leverage. an attempt to bring the opposing side to the negotiating table. It's about ideological purity for some and perhaps preventing what they see as fiscal irresponsibility. It's a blunt instrument, to be sure, but recognized one in the political annals of playbooks. However, the bad list is significantly longer, frankly, more impactful for those of us not sitting in the marble halls of Congress. The most obvious bad is the huge economic cost. This isn't just about direct loss of wages for federal workers. It's about the ripple effect throughout the economy, which I'll dive into a little bit more. There's also the disruption of critical government services. Even if essential personnel are working, the processing of applications, permits, and quite frankly, small business loans and routine but vital functions grind to an absolute halt. This damages public trust and can harm international reputation, and most immediately create severe financial hardship for federal workers and contractors who are often living paycheck to paycheck, just like the rest of us, many of us, right? It's a self-inflicted wound, and unfortunately, the taxpayer often foot the bill for the recovery. While these directly impacted faced significant personal stress and mental health issues as a result. It's definitely a case of the cure being worse than the disease, wouldn't you say? So now that we've glimpsed to the past, let's bring it back to the present. So you might be thinking, Elaine, okay, so Congress fights, a deadline passes, boom, a shutdown. But what are they actually fighting about this time? Because while the mechanism is consistent, the specific sticking points always differ. And understanding those disagreements help us grasp the potential duration of the actual impact. So, as I've discussed, the federal fiscal year starts October 1st, right? We just had that a little while ago. And as the deadline looms or passes, Congress is tasked with passing all 12 of those individual appropriation bills. This year, like many, has been a battleground. So the primary points of contention really kind of what we're seeing is the Republicans in the House are demanding deeper spending cuts than previously agreed upon, specifically targeting areas like environmental protection, social programs, while Democrats are holding firm on existing agreements and pushing for investment in infrastructure and education. So remember, infrastructure, all those things that actually make our cities go, like bridges and tunnels and other kinds of, now we're getting into technological, but infrastructure to help our country actually run the day-to-day operations and improving that structure. We're also seeing the usual cast of characters. The House of Representatives, often fragmented with different factions pushing different agendas. The Senate, typically a more deliberative body, but still requiring bipartisan consensus for many things. And, of course, the White House, trying to navigate these political currents and often trying to broker a deal or push their own priorities. Each branch has its own leverage, its own demands, and its own deadlines it's trying to meet or, quite frankly, avoid. And when those priorities clash, as they often do, the funding process grinds to a halt. It's less like a graceful dance and more like a political wrestling match. Think WWE or AMA, with the political people in the audience, wondering when the referee will blow the whistle, if at all. And unfortunately, that whistle often comes after we've already taken a number of hits to our wallets. So that's a little bit more about what's happening in this particular shutdown right now that's happening, that we are experiencing. It is significantly painful. I will tell you, it's impacting me directly. I am in the middle of a business deal. I am leveraging SBA financing for that deal. And I may be when you're looking to do a deal, oftentimes the deal has a timeline in which the deal needs to close. And if the deal doesn't close, everything about that you've negotiated up until that point is null and void. Well, because of the shutdown and I was leveraging SBA financing for this acquisition, I might have to, like, the last 2 months of negotiation might actually go down the toilet because I'm coming up against the deadline of when we're supposed to have negotiated all the terms, including the financing. So again, not only is all of the people that are involved in this deal might go away, but I was really looking forward to purchasing this business so that I could actually create more jobs through a very tactical expansion plan. But I can't do any of that because of the shutdown. Well, I will say this, it's very, very much impacted if I'm not able to get my SBA financing done in time for this particular deal before that time on our agreement has expired. So as you can see, like, it's even directly impacting me. So I'm very anxious for the government to get back up and going. I'm also going to be traveling. If you've been traveling, you've been seeing the lines have been very, very long at TSA because even though TSA is still running and operating, they might have reduce the amount of people working, right, because of the shutdown. Or people are just not showing up to work because they cannot afford to go to work and hope and pray that they're going to get paid or when they're going to get paid. They might be doing alternative gigs like DoorDash, maybe Lyft, other things where they know they can get paid right away so that they can support their families. So, that was a lot. Let's take a deep breath. I know it's a lot, but I'm going to give you some practical and tactical things that you actually can do to help with navigating all of this. So that's a wrap for wrapping up on what, the why, and when the government shutdowns. I hope I've given you a really clear view that this isn't a new phenomenon, but the impacts are always acutely felt on the ground in our everyday pocketbooks. But before we move on to the nitty-gritty, I'm going to talk about how this actually affects you, but I need you to do me a favor. If you're finding this breakdown super, super helpful, please make sure that you like and subscribe at Do.Different.Better on YouTube or your favorite social media, wherever you get podcasts. It helps us reach more savvy listeners just like you. And if you want to see our visual concept, definitely check out our Instagram. You can DM me and I will be happy to send you a one-pager on this or many of the other episodes that I've talked about where I'm really breaking down real financial implications of this particular shutdown. So stay tuned and I will see you after the break where I show you how to do different better. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. In the first segment, I peeled back the layers of a government shutdown. I talked about what it is, why it keeps happening, and what makes it so frustratingly predictable feature of our political landscape, particularly in more recent times. And what I mean by that is like the last 20 or 30 years. It definitely seems that they're happening far more frequently than they used to. We know that this is not a new dance, but it's one that always leaves an indelible mark on our economy. But now let's get to the brass tacks. Because while the politicians are debating, the real question for you and for me and for every American worker and investor is, how does this actually hit my wallet, my job, and quite frankly, my peace of mind? This segment is going to be all about unpacking the very real, tangible impacts on individuals, industries, and the broader U.S. economy. Prepare yourselves because the ripple effects are far wider than you might actually think. First, let's really talk about the personal. That is probably the most immediate and most often, but most heartbreaking impact is actually on individuals. When the government shuts down, it's not just an abstract entity halting operations. It's thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of real people who are directly affected. First, let's talk about our federal workers and government contractors. These are often our neighbors, our friends, and our family. Many are either furloughed or just sent home without any pay. And if they're deemed essential, they're working without pay, at least initially. Imagine showing up for your job every day, doing some critical work, but your paycheck is in limbo. Rent, mortgage payment, childcare costs, groceries, those bills don't go into limbo. You are still expected to pay. I know I've got a friend of mine. She was telling me that even if her child is sick, she still has to pay for that day of daycare. So just imagine you're at home taking care of your kid, but because you've already signed a contract with this childcare center, you're obligated to pay them, even though your kid's not in there, right? That to me is crazy. But think about this. All of those folks are still arriving on time to their job, regardless of Washington's gridlock. This creates an immense sense of financial strain, psychological stress, and forces many to dip into their savings, if they have any, take out loans, maybe payday loans, detrimental loans, or even pick up side jobs. It's a completely unfair position to put dedicated public servants in, and quite frankly, it's unacceptable. You wouldn't accept this in your job. You wouldn't just show up to your job and say, oh, it's okay for me to work and not get paid. That, my friends, is called volunteering. That's a different choice. But beyond the direct federal employees, think about those who actually rely on government services. And trust me, that's more of us than you actually imagine. You may not even know that you are being serviced or indirectly by government staff, right? Until you actually step in to an office and you're like, oh, wait a minute, what? I can't get what I need, right? If you're trying to get a passport process for an international trip that's coming up, that's a lot of people in business. I'm actually about to go to overseas in about another week or so. And fortunately, I already had my passport. But if this was my first time, I may not be able to get there because there's there's not enough people working in the passport office to be able to get my passport done in time. But if you're trying to get a passport, you can expect significant delays. And there are already delays before that. I was getting a passport for my son, and it was taking 2 or 3 months to get a passport. So just imagine that waiting time might be even longer. Maybe you're thinking about buying a home and applying for FHA or a VA loan. Those processes can grind to a halt. Small businesses hoping to secure an SBA loan. I told you about my situation earlier in the show. Those are also going to be delayed. Students needing verification for financial aid. Yes, that too is also going to be impacted. Even something as seemingly basic as getting customer service for Social Security or veteran benefits can experience severe and significant slowdowns. Though checks for existing beneficiaries usually to continue to go out, thank goodness for small favors, but for new applications or resolving issues, expect a longer wait. Many national parks and museums have closed, impacting not just vacation plans, people who have already spent that money and made plans to go to these national parks, which, by the way, are very, very popular, but also the local economies that rely on the tourism of those national parks. The anxiety isn't just for those directly affected. For the rest of us, there's a broader impact on our personal finances. A prolonged shutdown can lead to a general increase in anxiety about the economy, which can cause consumers to tighten their belts, reduce discretionary spending, and postpone big purchases. That, in turn, can create a broader economic slowdown that can eventually impact your job security, even if you don't work for the government, or affect your investment returns. It's that ripple effect that we're always talking about. proving that everything is truly interconnected in this financial ecosystem. So, individuals face a very direct and personal pinch. But let's zoom out a bit, because when one of the world's largest employers, the US government, hits pause, it doesn't just affect its workers. It sends shockwaves through the entire sectors of our economy. Industries that rely heavily on government contracts, permits, or consumer confidence always feel the squeeze. And that, my friends, often impacts your investments and the companies you work for. So now let's talk about economic fallout. If you thought the individual impacts were tough, let's talk about the domino effect on industries. Because when the government sputters, entire sectors feel the crunch. And this is where it starts to directly impact our investment portfolios and the broader job market. And when I say investment portfolios, this includes your IRA, this includes your 401k, it includes your Roth IRA. So first consider massive defense and government contractors. These companies, often publicly traded, rely on federal contracts for a significant portion of their revenue. A shutdown means delays in new contract awards, extensions on existing projects, and sometimes even delayed payments, even more so than usual, and the government is already a slow payer. If you're working with the government on a contract, you're talking about 90 to possibly 180 days of getting paid in the first place. Then you put a government shutdown on top of that, your payments might be delayed, which could impact your ability to pay your employees who have already worked and are waiting for their paycheck. So this has the impact of leading to reduced revenue, potential layoffs in the private sector, and a hit to their stock prices, which then impact if you're an employee and you have stock in the company, once again, you're getting another hit, right? Not exactly a bull signal for investors and in that space, is it? Then there's the travel and tourism industry. I mentioned national parks closing, but imagine the small businesses, hotels, restaurants, tour operators in those gateway towns that rely on that tourist traffic. They lose revenue overnight. While air traffic controllers usually deemed essential, prolonged uncertainty can also impact travel confidence, leading to fewer flights and lower occupancy rates for airlines and hotels. If you have holdings in these sectors, this is where you actually really need to pay attention. The housing and real estate market also takes a hit. Remember those FHA and VA loans? Delays in processing mean delays in closing deals, impacting buyers and sellers and real estate agents and mortgage brokers. It can inject uncertainty in an already sensitive market, potentially slowing down sales and even impacting home values in some areas. For those considering property investments, this is certainly a factor to watch. And let's not forget small businesses. They are often the backbone of our communities, and many rely on government services like SBA loans for growth, permits, certifications to operate. Delays here can stifle expansion. Also, there's been a long time effort to get more government contracting to small businesses. So a government shutdown, if they do have contracts, I know I sit on the board of an organization where 40% of our revenue comes from the government, comes from actually the post office. So again, we employ 300 people. The shutdown actually has a direct economic impact as well as individual impact right here in our community. These kinds of delays in payment can stifle the expansion, delay crucial funding, and force difficult decisions. Beyond that, when federal workers are furloughed or working without pay, their reduced spending filters down to local shops, restaurants, and service providers. That's less revenue for Main Street businesses, which can create a slow burn of economic pain, especially if you already have a small divested in community. It's a cruel irony that political battles can hurt the very entrepreneurs we rely on for our local economy vitality. Finally, sectors like research and science can also face significant setbacks. Government grants are frozen, federal labs are shut down, and important studies are put on hold. This can lead to a loss of valuable cancer research, other kinds of technology research, and delays medical breakthroughs, and even a brain drain as scientists seek to have more stable opportunities elsewhere. It's a long-term cost that often goes unquantified in the immediate political debate, but has profound implications for our future and our future innovation. So, from individual paychecks to entire industry, the impacts are 100% clear. But how does it all add up, Elaine? What does it mean for the grand scoreboard? The U.S. economy. Because ultimately, these micro disruptions really coalesce into a macroeconomic headache that can affect everyone from the average consumer to the largest institutional investors. So let's crunch some numbers and see the bigger picture. The financial forecast isn't always sunny, but I'm going to try to show you how to find some kind of financial umbrella. So there are things that you can think about doing and understanding the bigger picture of the economy. So I've talked to you about the individual, talked to you about the industry. Now I want to talk about these small cuts, how they add up to the larger wound of the overall economy. Economists widely agree that government shutdowns are simply bad for business, and that's just full stop. The first and most direct impact is the actual GDP, or gross domestic product. And if you're not familiar with gross domestic product, that basically is all the output across the United States across every industry. It's everything in totality that we make as a country. And that is analyzed year over year. And there's a cumulative figure of what that number is every single year. And it's not a small number. It's about $11 billion. So as you can see, that is a really big number. If that number falls, what might that do to our place in the international place of international economics? So as I promised, I am going to take you into the practical and tactical things that you can do. So let's talk about building your personal financial fortress, because we can't control what the political theater in Washington is doing, but we absolutely can control our own financial resilience. And frankly, this situation is a potent reminder of why core financial principles and disciplines are not just a nice to have, but absolute necessities. So here are your practical and tactical tips. First, I cannot stress enough. I know you're probably sick and tired of me talking about this, but you need to have an emergency fund. This is your ultimate shutdown hedge. If you've been putting it off, consider this your urgent call to action. Aim for at least 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses tucked away in an easily accessible liquid savings account. For many of us, especially those in finance adjacent roles or various income levels, putting into a high yield savings account or certificate of deposit at a different bank than where we normally bank really helps with, like, I don't want to get to a bank that is easily accessible and I can go and get money out and tie those shoes and buy those shoes, whatever the case may be but put that money away someplace. Even have it draw out of your account automatically to a separate bank account. Many employers have that capability, being able to deposit your check into different accounts, and you get to manage the amount that goes into each one of those accounts. This way, if you're actually prepared for an unseen life event, it means you don't have to stress about paying your rent, groceries, while politicians are playing games back and forth with the economy. If you're a federal worker or contractor and you haven't built this up yet, please, please, please make this an absolute priority. Now, let's talk about budget review. So this whole thing started with talking about the government and their inability to come to an agreement on a budget. Take this opportunity to scrutinize your spending. Identify any non-essential expenditures, the nice to haves versus the need to have, like rent, like food, those kinds of things, maybe childcare. But is there ways that where you can trim the fat, even in the short term, to be able to support your long-term goals of making sure that you're able to sustain a future hardship? Really managing your debt, paying down some high debt, or negotiating different terms for the debt that you have is another good way for you to do that. And for all you savvy investors that you really understanding the hills and valleys of the market and making sure that you have a diversified portfolio to be able to withstand some of these headwinds. You definitely want to make sure your portfolio doesn't have a lot of investments in it that are reliant on government contracts. So that's another way to diversify your portfolio. I think, we've talked on the show about alternatives. There's a whole list of alternative types of investments. Some people use gold, some people do crypto. There's lots of other things that you can use to diversify that aren't necessarily reliant on the government, but are investments. So if you find yourself in a cash crunch, you can actually sell those assets to be able to help you weather the storms of any government shutdown, right? So those of you that are having you're putting together your personal financial battle plans, these are things that are directly in your control. They are designed to shield your personal finances from the storm. But here at Do Different Better, we also believe in holistic empowerment. And that includes understanding and leveraging your power as a citizen. Because while we can't unilaterally prevent a shutdown, our collective voices do carry weight in a democracy. It's time to talk about your civic responsibility and not just talk about it, but what can you actually do? Your civic responsibility is not just about complaining, but this is about talking to your members of Congress, calling them, emailing them, sending them letters, share your story of how the government shutdown has impacted you, and explain the specific gridlocks that are causing it and how it impacts you personally, your family, and your community. They track census contacts. It's somebody's job to track every single person who calls, writes, or emails, and especially if you're in their constituency, you're a voter, and you want to lead with that. I'm a voter in your district. I am a voter in your state, whatever the case may be is. But also definitely vote, 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 vote. We've got elections that are coming up. Maybe you have some special elections that are coming up. Make sure that you vote and make it clear about what you're voting for. And I'm really not a big fan of being a single issue voter because, well, you might be really, really gung-ho on one particular issue. There might be a couple of other issues that actually impact your wallet. So just making sure that you look at all of your political leaders that you're voting for across their whole entire record beyond the particular single issue, right? It's really, really important. And then if you still decide that single issue is the most important to you and that you're willing to have the financial implications of the other decisions, great, more power to you. But knowledge is power, and you want to make sure that you do that. All right, my friends, we've covered a lot today. We've tackled the complexities of a government shutdown, understood the wide range impacts, and I've even given you some practical and tactical tools, not only in your personal finance foundational journey, but also civically, what you can do to actually participate and safeguard against a future shutdown, but also managing this one. So here's my challenge to you. Don't let the headlines leave you feeling helpless. Pick one thing from today's episode. Maybe it's checking your emergency fund balance, calling your senator or representative, but just do one thing so that you can be more prepared, more engaged, and ultimately more empowered. So if you like this episode, do me a favor, hit the like and subscribe button. Don't forget to connect with us on Instagram. Big shout out to AM950. Thank you so much. I can't wait to hear and see what you're doing and how you're managing. Let me know. Put something in the comments, and I will see you next time when I show you how to do different better. You got this.